The hard drive weighs 5 or 6 times as much as the SSD. The hard drive fails more often than the SSD. The hard drive has a shorter lifetime than the SSD. Flash storage is just inherently capable of much lower e-waste than hard drives. Hello, everybody. My name is John Colgrove. I'm the founder and chief visionary officer here at Pure Storage. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about data centers and some of the environmental impact and how we can help solve some of that problem. Data centers, they've really only been around, for the last 50 years. They've been growing tremendously. And, there's a lot of estimates on how much power they're actually using. Very common ones are that data centers use between 1% to 2% of all the electricity generated in the world. I've actually seen some estimates more in the 4 or 5% range. And it's just something that's growing. You look at new applications, new technologies, the power density inside these data centers is getting greater and greater. When I talk about power density, what I mean is when you have a rack of whether it's storage, servers, GPUs, as they get more powerful, as they get more ability to compute, they consume more and more power per rack unit or per rack, and thus the data center power keeps going up. And it's a big problem as well because you build a data center, and as you fill it and you find you need more and more power, you start going out to the city that you've built it in, and you start looking to build extra power circuits in, install new transformers, doing more construction, doing more, building, and people are just running out of power. One of the other things that drives it are new applications. Years ago, people started doing Bitcoin mining, and you would see these Bitcoin farms, and they would take up more and more power, and people would keep doing more powerful servers, denser servers, and do it. Now today, the Bitcoin mining thing is AI. As an example, one AI workload, 27,000 kilowatt hours for 9 days. It's 3,000 kilowatt hours a day. That's more than 100,000 kilowatts dedicated to just one model. And you think about how people do AI training, they run model after model after model. And, this explosion of AI, again, it's driving sales of GPUs through the roof. GPUs are among the most power-hungry things in your data center. I talk to people who are building data centers, and they talk about how we can't air cool it anymore. We have to do water cooling, immersion cooling, where you take the rack of equipment and you basically put it in a bath of it's an artificial oil, sort of like a vegetable oil. It's almost like put your server rack in olive oil and, let it cool. So, this is just something that is continuing to get worse, and it's driven by, dollars. When I can generate better AI inferences, I can make more profit. When I can generate better AI inferences, I can have more customer satisfaction. I can have a better customer experience, right? So AI, it helps make our lives better, but it consumes more and more power. And frankly, it consumes more power than we actually have available. There's no end to it. So if we don't contain this, what we're going to see in a few years is not data centers consuming 1 to 5% of the world's power. They'll consume 10%, 15%, 20%. Let's talk about, what we can do in terms of modern, more sustainable IT. One of the big things that we can do is convert to more modern technologies. Flash storage systems, such as we produce, can use a lot less power than disk storage systems. They can generate a lot less e-waste. As you do server systems, learning how to do all of this stuff more sustainable fashion, creating less e-waste, creating less power wastage. How can you use your systems more effectively? Years ago, the average server was about 15 to 20% utilized. That meant 80% of it was unused. Virtualization through VMware started increasing that utilization. And Just by increasing the utilization from, say, 20% to 25% to 30%, you just made a 50% reduction in the total impact of servers. So in storage, we look at a few things. One is, how do we get more utilization out of the data we're storing? That's more utilization by getting better performance so we can have the data serving more workloads. But more so than all that, it's building denser systems that are more efficient in terms of the materials in them. Today, we're selling flash modules that are 150 times the size we sold 10 years ago. And you think about that, that means 150 times less power, 150 times less e-waste. You compare flash to disk. I take an SSD, I take a hard drive. The hard drive weighs 5 or 6 times as much as the SSD. The hard drive fails more often than the SSD. The hard drive has a shorter lifetime than the SSD. Flash storage is just inherently capable of much lower e-waste than hard drives. You look at the power consumption. If I try to have a flash drive perform at the maximum speed possible to build the highest performance storage, that flash drive will use a lot of power. But if I build that flash drive to compete against disk, to have 10 times the performance of disk or 100 times the performance of disk, but not to be the maximum performance possible, I can be much, much more energy efficient. So I can build a lower powered flash drive that can replace a much heavier, much more e-waste intensive hard drive. I can put a lot more data into that flash drive. And so with that increasing amount of data, I'm again able to get more power efficiency of it. You know, the net result of doing all this, you know, we build all flash systems that, you know, generate literally 33 times less e-waste, aka 97% less e-waste. Compared to hybrid storage arrays or all disk arrays, they'll take up 1/20th the physical space. They'll use potentially 1/10th, 1/20th, 1/30th the power. And that is a gigantic amount of difference. And when you consider that in that data center, storage has traditionally been about 40% of the power draw. Now, with more GPUs coming in, the numbers probably drop now to 35 or 30% of the power draw. But, you know, we're taking a third the power draw of all these data centers, and we're eliminating 95% of that. That is a massive savings as far as the data centers go. When you compare that to how much total power all the data centers in the world take, again, it's a massive savings. The other benefit, by the way, of flash is you can actually adjust that. When you have your flash device and it is sitting idle, it uses a tiny fraction of the power it uses when it's active. You know, I think the other thing is worth pointing out, you know, a lot of data centers are trying to, through their ESG programs, buy green power. You know, I want to buy all sustainable power rather than using fossil fuels. It's great to use green power instead of fossil fuels, but it's better to use 1 megawatt instead of 2, 1 gigawatt instead of 2. And, you know, so our first priority is to cut down on the power, and that actually makes it easier to use sustainable power.
Thank you for your presentation, Kof. And I'm a moderator, and I have a few questions regarding your presentation. First of all, you mentioned that data center is adapting all-flash drives in order to not only reduce the power, but also increase the efficiency of the power and performance. So are you seeing a strong trend in new data centers to be built to deploy all-flash drive data centers to reduce the power usage? And what is the technical, you know, trend in data centers? Can you give us a little bit about, with your opinion, that?
So I think you're starting to get data centers built for that. You go back several years and, you know, this is all about the money, right? So disks were too cheap for flash to replace for all use cases until now. Right today, we've talked about our FlashBlade E product that we announced earlier this year. We're saying on a total cost of ownership basis, flash has now reached the equivalency of disk. And since flash is improving faster, it's just going to get better and widen that gap. So a data center built 5 years ago probably still looked at, well, I need a bunch of disk for my capacity storage because the disk was cheaper. I think today you're seeing people start to build data centers saying it can be all flash from top to bottom, from my highest performance workload to my most capacity sensitive workload. I think people are getting, they've been getting for years more efficient in cooling the data center. Some people, they locate the data centers in Alaska and you say, gee, I don't have to have as much air conditioning. I can just open the doors and let in the outside air. Immersion cooling is something that I hear a lot of people saying, I'm buying so many GPUs, I'm having to go to immersion cooling. And the immersion cooling can be efficient from an energy standpoint, but it's more complicated from a maintenance standpoint, right? You have the equipment is submerged in a bath of oil, right? So you have, think of it like a bathtub, and you've taken your rack and you've laid it on its side and set it down in there. And so when you want to service the equipment, you have to kind of lift the equipment out of the rack with a crane, and then it's got all this oil dripping, and you've got to figure out how you're going to clean the oil off of it or get the oil off in order to, say, replace a broken piece of equipment, and then put it back in the oil bath. And by the way, if you have it in the oil bath, it's very hard to service it while it's still connected because you have to lift it out of the rack all the way, as opposed to the way we have racks today where people can walk into the data center to the front and back. So the immersion cooling adds some new problems, but I see that as something people are talking more and more about. I think, again, the biggest issue is how much power do I actually need? People have to start designing for less power and saying, I'm going to demand that of all my suppliers, because if I'm in a place, and it would not surprise me if, someplace, a major city started saying, sorry, no data centers will be approved for construction because we just don't have the power. So people have to take action to reduce it.